The cursor blinks steadily on the black terminal screen, casting pale light across Edward Snowden's face in the dim hotel room in Hong Kong. Outside, the neon glow of it is June 2nd, 2013, and Snowden is making final preparations to hand over what will become the most significant intelligence leak in modern history. 4 laptops sit open around him, their screens displaying fragments of the most closely guarded secrets of the National Security Agency, documents that reveal a surveillance apparatus so vast and intrusive that it makes the dystopian visions of George Orwell seem quaint by comparison. The hard drives contain 40,000 classified files detailing programs with innocuous names that mask extraordinary capabilities. Prism, which siphons data directly from the servers of America's largest technology companies. Keyscore, a search engine that can query the private communications of virtually anyone on Earth. Boundless Informant, which maps the agency's global data collection in real time. Muscular, which taps the fiber optic cables carrying the world's internet traffic. Each program represents years of secret development, billions in taxpayer funding, and the systematic erosion of privacy rights that most Americans believed were protected by the Constitution. Hello there. If this brief is useful, like the video so this series reaches more people who care about real records, not rumors. Subscribe for more declassified stories. Snowden closes his eyes and listens to the ambient hum of the air conditioning, the distant murmur of Hong Kong traffic, the almost imperceptible whir of cooling fans in the encrypted hard drives. These may be among the last moments of his normal life, the final pause before he transforms from an unknown contractor into the most wanted man in America. He understands that once these documents reach the journalists waiting in the hotel lobby, there will be no going back, no return to his comfortable life in Hawaii with his girlfriend Lindsay Mills, no more quiet evenings, programming and reading philosophy. But the alternative, he has concluded, is unconscionable. The alternative is allowing the American intelligence apparatus to continue building what he will later describe as a surveillance state capable of monitoring every phone call, every email, every web search, every location check-in of every person on the planet. The alternative is complicity in what he believes represents the greatest threat to human freedom in the digital age. The story you are about to hear is drawn entirely from declassified files and public archives, from congressional testimony and court documents, from the very NSA documents that Snowden passed to journalists Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, and Barton Gellman. It is the factual account of how the most powerful surveillance system in human history was constructed in secret, justified by the trauma of September 11th, enabled by compliant courts and Congress, and ultimately exposed by a single whistleblower who believed that democracy requires informed consent of the governed. This is not a story about heroes and villains, though it contains both. It is not a tale of simple good versus evil, though moral questions permeate every chapter. Instead, it is the complex, often contradictory chronicle of how fear, technology, and institutional momentum combined to create a surveillance apparatus that its own creators sometimes struggled to understand or control. It is the story of how Americans traded privacy for security in a bargain whose terms they were never allowed to know, and what happened when those terms were finally revealed. The genesis of America's modern surveillance state can be traced to a crystalline September morning in 2001, when 19 hijackers armed with box cutters transformed the most powerful military in human history into a collection of smoking ruins and traumatized institutions. But the deeper roots of what would become the NSA's mass surveillance programs stretch back decades earlier to the cryptographic battles of World War II and the electronic espionage of the Cold War. The National Security Agency itself was born in secret on November 4, 1952, when President Harry Truman signed National Security Council Intelligence Directive No. 6, establishing what would become America's largest intelligence organization. For decades, NSA was so secretive that government officials joked the acronym stood for No Such Agency. Its mission was signals intelligence, the interception and analysis of foreign communications, and its legal authority was clearly circumscribed by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, which required warrants for domestic surveillance. But September 11th shattered those legal and cultural constraints like safety glass. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, as rescue workers pulled bodies from the rubble of the World Trade Center and investigators traced the hijackers' movements, a consensus emerged within the Bush administration that intelligence agencies had been operating with one hand tied behind their backs. The war between foreign and domestic intelligence, carefully constructed after the Watergate era to prevent intelligence agencies from spying on Americans, was suddenly viewed not as a constitutional protection, but as a dangerous impediment to national security. Vice President Dick Cheney, a veteran of the intelligence community dating back to the Ford administration, became the most influential voice, arguing for expanded surveillance powers. In meetings with President Bush, NSA Director Michael Hayden, and other senior officials, Cheney articulated what became known as the 1% doctrine. If there was even a 1% chance of another terrorist attack, the government had a moral obligation to act as if it were a certainty. This philosophy would provide the intellectual framework for programs that collected data on millions of innocent Americans, on the theory that some small fraction might someday prove relevant to counter-terrorism efforts. The legal architecture for expanded surveillance was constructed with remarkable speed. On October 26, 2001, just 45 days after the attacks, President Bush signed the USA Patriot Act into law. The acronym stood for Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. And despite its unwieldy title, the law fundamentally altered the relationship between the American government and its citizens. Section 215 of the Patriot Act expanded the government's ability to collect business records, including library records, medical records, and financial transactions, while Section 205 allowed roving wiretaps that could follow suspects across multiple communication devices. But even these expanded legal authorities were insufficient for what the Bush administration had in mind. On October 4, 2001, less than a month after the attacks, President Bush signed a classified directive authorizing what would become known as the President's Surveillance Program. This collection of activities, operating under the code name Stellar Wind, represented the most significant expansion of domestic surveillance since the creation of the NSA itself. The program began modestly, at least by the standards of what would follow. NSA technicians working at AT&T facilities in San Francisco and other cities began copying internet traffic and phone records flowing through the company's network infrastructure. The initial focus was on international communications, calls and emails that crossed US borders, but the technical realities of internet routing meant that enormous volumes of purely domestic communications were inevitably swept up as well. General Michael Hayden, who served as NSA director from 1999 to 2005, later described the program as essential to connecting the dots that intelligence agencies had failed to connect before September 11th. In classified briefings to congressional leaders, Hayden argued that the NSA needed to cast a wider net to catch communications between terrorist operatives who had learned to use sophisticated encryption and communication techniques. The agency's traditional approach of targeting specific individuals with court-approved warrants was too slow and too narrow for the digital age, where terrorist communications could be routed through servers anywhere in the world. The legal justification for these programs was provided by John Yoo, a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel, who authored a series of classified memos arguing that the President's constitutional powers as Commander-in-Chief during wartime superseded statutory restrictions on domestic surveillance. These memos, which would later become known as the torture memos for their justification of enhanced interrogation techniques, also provided the legal foundation for warrantless surveillance of American citizens. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, established by the 1978 FISA law to provide judicial oversight of intelligence surveillance, was initially bypassed entirely. The Bush administration argued that the court's procedures were too cumbersome for the rapid response required in the war on terror. When the program was eventually brought under FISE oversight in 2004, the court proved remarkably accommodating, approving nearly every surveillance request submitted by the government. Key figures within the intelligence community raised concerns about both the legality and the effectiveness of these expanded surveillance programs. FBI Director Robert Mueller expressed reservations about the lack of judicial oversight, while several career NSA lawyers questioned whether the agency had the legal authority to collect domestic communications without warrants. But these concerns were generally overruled by senior political appointees who argued that aggressive action was necessary to prevent another September 11th. The programs expanded rapidly during the Bush administration's second term. The NSA's budget grew from approximately $3.2 billion in 2001 to an estimated $10.8 billion by 2013, though precise figures remain classified. The agency's workforce expanded from approximately 38,000 employees and contractors in 2001 to more than 40,000 by 2013, with much of the growth concentrated in the technical divisions responsible for Internet surveillance. Congressional oversight during this period was limited to the so-called Gang of Eight, the congressional leaders and intelligence committee chairs who received periodic briefings on classified programs. Several of these officials, including Senator Jay Rockefeller and Representative Nancy Pelosi, expressed concerns about the scope and legality of the surveillance programs, but their objections were conveyed through classified letters that had no binding legal effect. The political momentum behind expanded surveillance powers was reinforced by a series of attempted terrorist attacks that were thwarted by intelligence agencies. The shoe bomber Richard Reed in December 2001, the Dirty Bomb Plot by Jose Padilla in May 2002, and the Financial Buildings Plot in 2004 all demonstrated that the terrorist threat remained active and required constant vigilance. Intelligence officials argued that expanded surveillance capabilities had been crucial to detecting and disrupting these plots, though the specific role of domestic surveillance programs remained classified. By 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president, on a platform that included criticism of Bush administration surveillance policies, the institutional momentum behind these programs had become nearly unstoppable. The new president, after receiving classified briefings on ongoing counterterrorism operations, chose to maintain and in some cases expand the surveillance programs he had criticized as a candidate. The Obama administration argued that additional oversight and legal reviews had addressed the constitutional concerns while preserving the operational capabilities that protected American lives. The technical infrastructure supporting these surveillance programs grew increasingly sophisticated throughout this period. The NSA constructed massive data centers in Utah, Maryland, and other locations capable of storing exabytes of intercepted communications. The agency developed close relationships with telecommunications companies and internet service providers, many of whom cooperated voluntarily with government surveillance requests, while others were compelled to participate through secret court orders. This expansion occurred largely in secret, hidden from public debate by classification rules that made even the existence of most surveillance programs state secrets. The American public was aware that intelligence agencies had been granted expanded powers after September 11th, but the full scope and technical capabilities of the surveillance apparatus remained unknown to all but a small circle of government officials and contractors with the highest security clearances. The National Security Agency's transformation from a foreign intelligence service to a global surveillance apparatus required not just legal authorities and political support, but a complete reimagining of signals intelligence for the Internet age. The traditional model of intercepting radio communications and tapping phone lines gave way to a complex ecosystem of programs designed to capture, store, and analyze the digital exhaust of modern life. The technical foundation of NSA surveillance rested on a simple but profound insight. In the digital age, nearly all human communication eventually travels through a finite number of physical infrastructure points. Internet traffic crosses borders through undersea cables, wireless communications pass through cell towers, and cloud computing concentrates data in massive server farms operated by a handful of technology companies. By gaining access to these choke points, the NSA could potentially monitor a significant fraction of global communications. The agency's approach to surveillance was comprehensively documented in the Snowden files, which revealed a taxonomy of collection methods that intelligence professionals categorized as either upstream or downstream. Upstream collection involved intercepting communications as they flowed through internet infrastructure, while downstream collection obtained data directly from technology companies through legal compulsion or voluntary cooperation. The most significant upstream collection program was codenamed UPS Stream, a remarkably direct designation that reflected the program's straightforward approach. Beginning in 2007, NSA technicians installed sophisticated monitoring equipment at major internet exchanges and telecommunications facilities across the United States. These installations, known internally as Special Source Operations (SSO), allowed the agency to copy internet traffic flowing through fiber optic cables carrying communications between continents. The technical capabilities of upstream collection were staggering in scope. NSA documents revealed that the agency could monitor approximately 75% of internet traffic passing through the United States, including communications that neither originated nor terminated on American soil, but were routed through U.S. infrastructure for efficiency reasons. This traffic included emails, web browsing, file downloads, video streaming, and voice-over internet protocol calls from users around the world who had no reason to expect their communications would be subject to American surveillance. The most detailed documentation of upstream collection came from NSA's partnership with AT&T, codenamed Fairview, which began in 1985 as a foreign intelligence operation, but expanded dramatically after September 11th. Internal NSA documents described AT&T as an extremely willing partner whose cooperation went far beyond what was legally required. The company provided the NSA with access to telecommunications infrastructure, assisted with the installation of monitoring equipment, and helped develop new surveillance technologies. Similar partnerships existed with Verizon, codenamed Stormbrew, Sprint, codenamed Spinneret, and other major telecommunications providers. These companies received millions of dollars in payments from the NSA for their cooperation, though they also faced significant legal and financial risks if they disclosed their participation in surveillance programs. The legal framework compelling their participation was provided by Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which authorized the collection of foreign intelligence from electronic communications. Downstream collection operated through different technical mechanisms but achieved similar results. The most well-known downstream program was PRISM, which obtained data directly from the servers of major technology companies including Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Apple, and others. PRISM was established in 2007 under the authority of the FISA Amendments Act, which streamlined the process for obtaining surveillance orders against foreign targets. The technical implementation of PRISM varied by company, but generally involved the installation of secure file transfer protocol servers that allowed the NSA to retrieve specific data requested through FISA orders. These servers could access email accounts, instant messaging conversations, voice and video calls, photographs, stored documents, and other data maintained by the technology companies. The companies were legally prohibited from disclosing their participation in the program, creating a system of secret cooperation that remained hidden from users. Internal NSA documents revealed that PRISM was considered one of the agency's most valuable intelligence sources. A 2012 presentation described PRISM as contributing to 1 in 7 intelligence reports produced by the NSA, with particularly valuable intelligence coming from Yahoo, Microsoft, and Google. The program was credited with providing intelligence on foreign terrorist organizations, cyber threats, and weapons proliferation, though specific operational details remained classified. The NSA's surveillance capabilities extended far beyond these primary collection programs. X-Keyscore, described in internal documents as the NSA's widest-reaching system for searching collected internet data, functioned as a search engine for intercepted communications. Analysts could query X-Keyscore using email addresses, phone numbers, names, or even specific phrases to retrieve communications of interest. The system maintained an index of intercepted communications that was searchable in near real time, allowing analysts to quickly identify communications related to specific intelligence targets. Muscular operated jointly with the British Government Communications Headquarters GCHQ, intercepted data flowing between Google and Yahoo data centers by tapping the fiber optic cables connecting these facilities. This program was particularly controversial because it bypassed the legal protections of PRISM by collecting data before it reached the company's secure servers, effectively circumventing the judicial oversight required for domestic surveillance. The technical sophistication of NSA surveillance extended to mobile communications through programs like Dishfire, which collected text messages, and CO Traveler, which tracked the movements of mobile devices. These programs could identify when two phones were in the same location at the same time, potentially revealing relationships between surveillance targets and their associates. The NSA also developed capabilities to track internet users across different devices and platforms, creating comprehensive profiles of individual communication patterns and social networks. 3 specific vignettes from the Snowden documents illustrate the operational realities of these surveillance programs. On March 15, 2012, NSA analysts used X-Keyscore to investigate suspicious communications originating from Pakistan. The query, which searched for specific Arabic phrases related to explosives, returned thousands of results that analysts manually reviewed to identify potential terrorist communications. The process revealed both the power and the limitations of automated surveillance. While the system could quickly identify communications containing keywords of interest, human analysts were still required to determine which communications represented genuine threats. A second documented case from September 23, 2011, involved the use of PRISM to investigate a suspected cyber attack against a U.S. defense contractor. NSA analysts obtained a FOIA order to collect email communications from several technology companies, which revealed that the attack had originated from servers in China and involved the theft of classified defense technologies. The investigation demonstrated how PRISM could be used for cybersecurity purposes beyond traditional counterterrorism operations. The third example, from June 8, 2013, just days before Snowden's first revelations, showed NSA analysts using MU-SEULA to monitor communications between suspected foreign intelligence operatives. The intercepts revealed plans for recruiting American sources within the defense establishment, allowing the FBI to identify and potentially turn or arrest the individuals involved. This case illustrated how the NSA's most controversial programs could produce valuable counterintelligence results, even as they raise significant questions about the agency's legal authorities and oversight. The scale of data collection enabled by these programs was almost incomprehensible. Internal NSA documents revealed that the agency collected approximately 20 billion communications per day through all of its surveillance programs combined. This included roughly 5 billion records of mobile phone locations, 3 billion telecommunications records, and millions of emails, instant messages, and other internet communications. The volume of collected data was so large that it required the construction of specialized storage facilities, including the Utah Data Center, a 1 million square foot facility capable of storing exabytes of intercepted communications. The human infrastructure supporting these technical capabilities was equally impressive. The NSA employed thousands of analysts, technicians, and linguists who processed collected intelligence around the clock. The agency maintained operations centers at Fort Meade, Maryland, and other locations where analysts monitored global communications in real time, searching for evidence of terrorist plots, cyber attacks, weapons proliferation, and other national security threats. Training materials for NSA analysts, revealed in the Snowden documents, emphasized both the power and the responsibility that came with access to these surveillance systems. Analysts were required to complete extensive training on legal authorities, minimization procedures designed to protect the privacy of U.S. persons, and technical procedures for querying surveillance databases. However, oversight of individual analyst activities was limited, and several internal audits revealed instances where analysts had used surveillance systems to monitor the communications of ex-spouses, romantic interests, and other personal targets. The operational deployment of NSA surveillance capabilities revealed both the strategic value and the inherent limitations of mass data collection as an intelligence tool. 3 major operations, documented extensively in the Snowden files and subsequent investigations, demonstrate how the agency's vast technical infrastructure was applied to specific national security challenges with varying degrees of success. Operation Olympic Games represented the most sophisticated offensive cyber operation in recorded history, demonstrating how signals intelligence capabilities could be weaponized for sabotage purposes. Beginning in 2006, the NSA collaborated with Israeli intelligence to develop and deploy the Stuxnet computer worm against Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities at Natanz. The operation required detailed intelligence on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, much of which was obtained through surveillance programs that monitored communications between Iranian nuclear scientists, government officials, and foreign suppliers. The technical development of Stuxnet required the NSA to reverse engineer the industrial control systems manufactured by Siemens that controlled Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges. This process involved obtaining detailed technical specifications through surveillance of communications between Siemens and its customers, as well as through more traditional human intelligence sources. The resulting malware was designed to subtly alter the speed of centrifuge rotation while displaying normal readings to Iranian operators, causing the machines to tear themselves apart while concealing the source of the sabotage. The operational deployment of Stuxnet required sophisticated intelligence on Iranian networks and personnel that could only be obtained through comprehensive surveillance. NSA analysts used X-keyscore and other surveillance tools to identify Iranian nuclear scientists and engineers whose computers could serve as entry points for the malware. The operation also required detailed intelligence on Iranian procurement networks, obtained through PRISM and upstream collection, to understand how Iran obtained components for its nuclear program despite international sanctions. The results of Operation Olympic Games exceeded expectations, destroying approximately 1,000 centrifuges at Natanz and setting back Iran's nuclear program by an estimated 2 years. However, the operation also demonstrated the risks of cyber warfare when the Stuxnet worm eventually escaped Iranian networks and infected computers worldwide, revealing the existence of sophisticated American cyber weapons to intelligence services and criminal organizations around the globe. Operation Trebia focused on counterintelligence, using NSA surveillance capabilities to identify and track foreign intelligence operatives attempting to recruit American sources. Beginning in 2009, the operation targeted communications networks used by Russian Foreign Intelligence Service (SVR) operatives working under diplomatic cover in the United States. The NSA used a combination of PRISM, X-keyscore, and other surveillance tools to monitor communications between suspected Russian operatives and their contacts in Moscow. The intelligence picture that emerged from Operation Trebia was remarkably detailed, revealing the operational methods, communication protocols, and targeting priorities of Russian intelligence services. NSA analysts discovered that Russian operatives were using sophisticated encryption and covert communication techniques, including steganography to hide messages in digital photographs and dead drop locations in public parks for exchanging physical materials. The surveillance revealed that Russian intelligence was particularly interested in recruiting sources within the American defense establishment, energy sector, and technology companies. The NSA tracked communications between Russian operatives and several American citizens who had been approached for recruitment, allowing the FBI to interview these individuals and potentially turn them into double agents or remove them from sensitive positions. The most significant success of Operation Trebia came in 2010, when NSA surveillance helped identify a network of Russian deep cover agents known as illegals who had been operating in the United States for decades. The operation revealed communications between these agents and their handlers in Moscow, leading to the arrest of 10 Russian operatives in what became known as the spy swap of 2010. The arrested agents were exchanged for 4 Russian nationals who had been imprisoned for allegedly spying for the West, in a dramatic exchange at Vienna International Airport that recalled the prisoner swaps of the Cold War. Operation Shortgiant represented the NSA's most ambitious attempt to penetrate Chinese government and military networks, demonstrating both the potential and the limitations of signals intelligence in strategic competition with other major powers. Beginning in 2011, the operation used multiple collection methods to monitor Chinese cyber espionage activities against American government agencies, defense contractors, and technology companies. The operation revealed the organizational structure and operational methods of Chinese cyber espionage units, particularly the People's Liberation Army Unit 61398, which was responsible for extensive cyber operations against American targets. NSA surveillance tracked communications between Chinese cyber operatives and their commanders, revealing the military chain of command responsible for cyber espionage and the specific American targets being prioritized by different Chinese units. The intelligence collected through Operation Shortgiant provided detailed technical information about Chinese cyber capabilities, including previously unknown malware families and network exploitation techniques. This intelligence allowed American cybersecurity professionals to develop better defenses against Chinese cyber attacks and helped attribute specific attacks to particular Chinese units. However, the operation also revealed the limitations of even the most sophisticated surveillance capabilities when applied against sophisticated adversaries. Chinese intelligence services were aware of American surveillance capabilities and employed extensive operational security measures to protect their most sensitive communications. Many important Chinese cyber operations were conducted using networks and communication methods that were not accessible to NSA surveillance, limiting the intelligence value of the collection. The operational feedback from these three major intelligence operations influenced the continued development and expansion of NSA surveillance programs throughout the Obama administration. The success of Operation Olympic Games demonstrated the value of detailed technical intelligence for offensive cyber operations, leading to increased investment in programs designed to penetrate foreign computer networks. The counterintelligence successes of Operation Trivia justified continued surveillance of diplomatic communications and international financial transactions, while the mixed results of Operation Shortgiant highlighted the need for improved capabilities against sophisticated state adversaries. Each of these operations also generated significant amounts of incidental collection, the inevitable byproduct of mass surveillance systems that cannot perfectly distinguish between legitimate intelligence targets and innocent communications. Internal NSA audits revealed that analysts reviewing communications collected during these operations frequently encountered the private communications of American citizens who had no connection to the intelligence targets under investigation. The minimization procedures, designed to protect the privacy of U.S. persons, proved difficult to implement consistently across such large-scale operations. NSA analysts were required to purge communications of American citizens from their databases unless these communications met specific criteria for retention, but the sheer volume of collected data made comprehensive review practically impossible. Automated systems designed to identify and flag communications of U.S. persons were imperfect, leading to both over-retention of American communications and under-retention of potentially valuable foreign intelligence. Counter-operations by foreign intelligence services added additional complexity to NSA surveillance operations. Russian, Chinese, and other intelligence services were aware of American surveillance capabilities and developed increasingly sophisticated methods to evade detection. These included the use of encrypted communication channels, the employment of unwitting intermediaries to transmit sensitive information, and the deliberate transmission of false or misleading information designed to confuse American analysts. The operational tempo of NSA surveillance programs accelerated significantly during periods of heightened international tension. During the Arab Spring uprisings of 2011 and 2012, the agency dramatically increased its collection against Middle Eastern governments and opposition groups, generating vast amounts of intelligence about political developments in Egypt, Libya, Syria, and other countries. Similarly, during the Ukraine crisis of 2014, NSA surveillance of Russian government communications provided American policymakers with detailed intelligence about Russian military intentions and diplomatic strategies. The operational effectiveness of these surveillance programs remained a subject of internal debate within the intelligence community. Supporters argued that mass collection was essential for connecting dots that human analysts might otherwise miss, while critics contended that the volume of collected data was overwhelming analytical capabilities and reducing the overall quality of intelligence production. These debates would become central to public discussions about surveillance reform after the Snowden revelations exposed the existence and scope of these programs to public scrutiny. The technical methodologies underlying NSA surveillance operations revealed an intelligence apparatus that had evolved far beyond traditional concepts of wiretapping and signals interception into something approaching comprehensive digital omniscience. The operational techniques documented in the Snowden files demonstrated how the agency had adapted to the internet age by developing capabilities that could exploit virtually every aspect of modern digital communication. The foundational technique underlying most NSA operations was what intelligence professionals termed full-take collection, the practice of intercepting and storing complete communications rather than just metadata or summaries. This approach represented a fundamental departure from earlier intelligence collection methods, which typically focused on specific targets and specific types of information. Instead, the NSA developed systems capable of collecting everything and sorting through it later, a methodology that was only possible because of dramatic advances in digital storage and processing capabilities. The implementation of full-take collection required sophisticated traffic management systems that could handle the enormous volumes of data flowing through modern internet infrastructure. NSA engineers developed specialized hardware and software systems that could process network traffic at line speed, meaning they could analyze and categorize communications as quickly as they flowed through fiber optic cables. These systems used deep packet inspection techniques to examine not just the addressing information of internet communications, but also their content, allowing the agency to sort communications by type, origin, destination, and content categories. The selector-based targeting system represented the NSA's primary method for identifying communications of intelligence interest within the vast ocean of collected data. Selectors were specific identifiers associated with surveillance targets, including email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, or even unique device identifiers. When communications containing these selectors were detected in the agency's collection systems, they were automatically flagged for analyst review and stored in searchable databases. The sophistication of selector-based targeting went far beyond simple keyword matching. NSA systems could identify communications between surveillance targets even when they used code words, encrypted communications, or indirect references. The agency developed natural language processing capabilities that could analyze the semantic content of communications in multiple languages, identifying conversations about weapons, explosives, travel plans, or other topics of intelligence interest, even when participants avoided obvious keywords. Contact chaining represented one of the most powerful analytical techniques in the NSA's arsenal, allowing analysts to map the social networks of surveillance targets by analyzing patterns of communication. The technique began with a known selector associated with a surveillance target, and then identified all the other selectors that had communicated with that target. The process could be repeated iteratively, creating maps of communication networks that extended several degrees of separation from the original target. Internal NSA training materials revealed that contact chaining could quickly generate enormous amounts of information about the associates, family members, colleagues, and acquaintances of surveillance targets. A single terrorism suspect might have contact chains extending to thousands of individuals, many of whom had no connection to terrorist activities, but found their communications swept up in NSA databases because of their indirect connection to surveillance targets. The temporal analysis capabilities of NSA systems allowed analysts to identify patterns of behavior and communication that might indicate operational planning or coordination. By analyzing when surveillance targets communicated, how frequently they communicated, and whether their communication patterns changed in response to external events, analysts could potentially identify periods of heightened activity that might indicate planned operations. These temporal analysis techniques proved particularly valuable for cybersecurity investigations, where the timing of communications often revealed important information about the coordination of attacks. NSA analysts could identify when multiple members of a hacking group were online simultaneously, when they were conducting reconnaissance against specific targets, and when they were preparing to launch attacks based on patterns of increased communication activity. Location-based analysis represented another crucial technique in the NSA's operational toolkit, using information from mobile devices, internet connections, and other sources to track the physical movements of surveillance targets. The agency developed sophisticated capabilities for correlating location information from multiple sources, creating comprehensive tracking databases that could follow individuals across different devices, communication platforms, and geographic locations. The Fascia database, revealed in the Snowden documents, contained location information for hundreds of millions of mobile devices worldwide, updated in near real time as users move through areas covered by cellular networks. This database could be used to identify when two surveillance targets were in the same location at the same time, to track the movements of specific individuals across international borders, and to identify patterns of travel that might indicate operational activity. Cross-platform correlation techniques allowed NSA analysts to connect communications and activities across different technology platforms and services. An individual might use different email providers, social media platforms, messaging applications, and communication devices, but NSA systems could potentially link all of these activities to a single identity through technical signatures, behavioral patterns, and network analysis. The browser fingerprinting capabilities developed by the NSA could identify individual users across different websites and platforms based on unique characteristics of their web browsers, including screen resolution, installed plugins, operating system details, and other technical specifications. These fingerprints were unique enough to track specific individuals even when they used privacy-protecting technologies like Tor or virtual private networks. Cryptographic attack techniques represented some of the NSA's most closely guarded operational capabilities, involving sophisticated mathematical and computational methods for breaking encryption systems or circumventing their protections. The agency maintained extensive research programs focused on identifying vulnerabilities in commercial encryption products and developing techniques for exploiting these vulnerabilities. The Bull Run program, named after a Civil War battle, represented the NSA's systematic effort to defeat encryption technologies used to protect internet communications. Internal documents revealed that the program had achieved success against several commercial encryption systems through mathematical attacks, implementation flaws, and covert cooperation with technology companies. The program also involved efforts to weaken encryption standards during their development, ensuring that NSA would be able to break encrypted communications even when they appeared secure to users. Zero-day exploits represented another category of NSA operational techniques involving the use of previously unknown software vulnerabilities to gain access to computer systems and networks. The agency maintained extensive databases of zero-day exploits for popular software products, allowing analysts to remotely access computers and mobile devices belonging to surveillance targets. The Tailored Access Operations (TAO) unit, responsible for offensive cyber operations, developed sophisticated techniques for implanting surveillance software on target computers and networks. These techniques included modifying hardware during the manufacturing process, intercepting shipments of computer equipment to install surveillance devices, and developing malware that could spread through networks and establish persistent access to target systems. Behavioral analysis techniques allowed NSA analysts to identify individuals of interest based on patterns of online activity that might indicate involvement in terrorism, espionage, or other national security threats. The agency developed automated systems that could analyze communication patterns, website visits, search queries, and other online activities to generate risk scores for individual users. These behavioral analysis systems incorporated machine learning algorithms that could identify subtle patterns in online behavior that might not be apparent to human analysts. The systems could potentially identify individuals who were researching explosives, planning travel to conflict zones, communicating with known terrorists, or exhibiting other behaviors associated with national security threats. The integration of these various operational techniques created a comprehensive surveillance capability that could potentially monitor virtually any aspect of modern digital life. NSA systems could track the physical movements of individuals through their mobile devices, monitor their communications across multiple platforms and services, analyze their social networks and behavioral patterns, and potentially gain access to their computers and digital devices through cyber techniques. The operational deployment of these techniques required careful coordination between different NSA divisions and external partners. Signals Intelligence, SIGINT divisions were responsible for collecting communications, while the Information Assurance IA division worked to protect American networks from foreign surveillance. The Tailored Access Operations division conducted offensive cyber operations, while the Special Source Operations division managed relationships with telecommunications companies and internet service providers. Quality control and validation procedures were essential components of NSA operational techniques, ensuring that intelligence derived from surveillance operations was accurate and reliable. The agency maintained extensive databases of known intelligence sources and used multiple collection methods to corroborate important intelligence before disseminating it to policymakers and other intelligence agencies. However, the scale and complexity of NSA surveillance operations made comprehensive quality control increasingly difficult. Internal audits revealed numerous instances where automated systems had misclassified communications, where analysts had misinterpreted collected intelligence, or where technical problems had led to the collection of information that fell outside the agency's legal authorities. These quality control challenges would become significant factors in the debates about surveillance reform that followed the Snowden revelations. The financial and political architecture supporting NSA surveillance operations represented a complex ecosystem of budgets, contracts, legal frameworks, and institutional relationships that enabled the agency to construct and maintain the most comprehensive surveillance apparatus in human history. The economic dimensions of this system, largely hidden from public view until the Snowden revelations, revealed how intelligence operations had become deeply integrated with the private technology sector and the broader American economy. The NSA's budget during the period of surveillance expansion grew dramatically but remained classified, making precise financial analysis difficult. However, documents in the congressional budget justification, portions of which were revealed through the Snowden files, indicated that the agency's annual budget increased from approximately $3.2 billion in fiscal year 2001 to an estimated $10.8 billion by fiscal year 2013. This growth rate significantly exceeded inflation and represented one of the largest budget increases for any federal agency during this period. The breakdown of NSA spending revealed the agency's priorities and operational focus. Approximately 40% of the budget was devoted to personnel costs, supporting a workforce that had grown from roughly 38,000 employees and contractors in 2001 to more than 40,000 by 2013. Another 30% was allocated to research and development, reflecting the agency's need to continuously adapt to changing technology and communication patterns. The remaining 30% covered operational expenses, infrastructure development, and technology acquisition. The private contractor relationships that supported NSA operations represented a fundamental shift in how the American intelligence community operated, moving from a primarily government-employed workforce to a hybrid model that relied heavily on private sector expertise and capabilities. Major defense contractors, including Booz Allen Hamilton, SAIC, Computer Sciences Corporation, and Northrop Grumman, received billions of dollars in NSA contracts during this period, providing everything from basic information technology services to sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Edward Snowden himself was employed by Booz Allen Hamilton as a contractor supporting NSA operations, illustrating how deeply private companies had become integrated into the most sensitive intelligence operations. The contractor model provided the NSA with access to specialized technical expertise that was often difficult to recruit and retain within government salary structures, but it also created significant security risks by expanding the number of individuals with access to classified information. The telecommunications industry's cooperation with NSA surveillance operations was facilitated through a combination of legal compulsion, financial incentives, and patriotic appeals that created a complex web of public-private partnerships. Major telecommunications companies including AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint received millions of dollars annually for their cooperation with surveillance programs, ostensibly to cover the costs of complying with government requests, but in practice, providing significant revenue streams for these companies. AT&T's relationship with the NSA, codenamed Fairview, was particularly extensive and profitable. Internal NSA documents revealed that AT&T received more than $100 million annually for its cooperation with surveillance programs, making the NSA one of the company's largest customers. This financial relationship created institutional incentives for cooperation that went far beyond what was legally required, with AT&T actively assisting the NSA in developing new surveillance capabilities and expanding access to telecommunications infrastructure. The technology companies participating in PRISM and other downstream collection programs face different economic pressures and incentives. Unlike telecommunications companies, which were generally required to cooperate with surveillance requests under existing legal authorities, technology companies often had more discretion in how they responded to government requests for user data. The economic impact of cooperation with surveillance programs varied significantly among technology companies. Some companies, particularly those with significant government contracts or international operations, viewed cooperation as necessary for maintaining good relationships with regulators and avoiding potential legal conflicts. Other companies, particularly those whose business models depended heavily on user trust and privacy, were more resistant to surveillance cooperation and implemented technical measures designed to limit government access to user data. The legal framework supporting surveillance operations was itself a form of economic infrastructure, requiring significant investment in lawyers, compliance systems, and administrative processes. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court system, established by the 1978 FISA law, evolved into a specialized judicial system that processed thousands of surveillance requests annually while operating almost entirely in secret. The FISC approved approximately 34,000 surveillance orders between 2001 and 2013, rejecting only 11 requests during this entire period. This approval rate of more than 99% reflected both the court's deference to national security arguments and the government's practice of consulting with court staff before submitting formal applications to ensure they would be approved. The administrative costs of maintaining this legal framework were substantial but largely hidden from public view. The Department of Justice employed dozens of lawyers and support staff dedicated exclusively to preparing FISA applications, while the NSA maintained extensive legal and compliance divisions to ensure that surveillance operations remained within approved parameters. These costs represented a significant but generally unacknowledged expense of the surveillance system. International intelligence sharing arrangements created additional economic dimensions to NSA surveillance operations. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, comprising the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, facilitated the sharing of surveillance costs and capabilities among partner nations. Each country contributed different technical capabilities and geographic access, creating efficiencies that would have been impossible for any single nation to achieve independently. The economic relationship between the NSA and foreign intelligence services was particularly complex, involving both cooperation and competition. The NSA provided technical capabilities and intelligence to partner services while also conducting surveillance operations against the citizens and governments of allied nations. This dual relationship created tensions that were largely managed through diplomatic channels, but occasionally erupted into public controversies when surveillance operations were exposed. The Utah Data Center, the NSA's largest data storage facility, represented one of the most visible examples of the economic infrastructure supporting surveillance operations. The facility, which cost an estimated $2 billion to construct, was designed to store exabytes of intercepted communications and support the computational requirements of surveillance analysis. The center required massive amounts of electrical power, specialized cooling systems, and sophisticated security measures, creating ongoing operational costs that were estimated at several $100 million annually. The political economy of surveillance extended beyond direct government spending to include the broader economic impacts of surveillance programs on the technology industry and American competitiveness. The revelation of NSA surveillance programs through the Snowden documents created significant challenges for American technology companies, which faced questions about their cooperation with surveillance programs and potential boycotts from international customers concerned about privacy and security. Several major technology companies reported significant financial impacts from surveillance revelations, including lost contracts, reduced international sales, and increased costs for implementing privacy and security measures. A study by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation estimated that American technology companies could lose as much as $35 billion in revenue over 3 years as a result of surveillance-related concerns among international customers. The diplomatic costs of surveillance operations also represented a significant but difficult to quantify economic impact. The revelation that the NSA had monitored the communications of foreign leaders, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, created diplomatic crises that required extensive resources to manage and resolve. These diplomatic costs included cancelled meetings, delayed trade negotiations, and reduced cooperation on other international issues. Congressional oversight of surveillance programs was limited by classification restrictions that prevented most members of Congress from fully understanding the scope and costs of these operations. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees received detailed briefings on surveillance programs and their budgets, but this information could not be shared with other members of Congress or discussed in public forums. The economic analysis of surveillance programs was further complicated by the difficulty of measuring their effectiveness and return on investment. Intelligence agencies argued that surveillance programs had prevented terrorist attacks and provided valuable intelligence on foreign threats, but the classified nature of these operations made independent assessment of their effectiveness nearly impossible. Cost-benefit analyses of surveillance programs were conducted internally by intelligence agencies and executive branch officials, but these analyses were not subject to independent review or public scrutiny. Critics argued that the economic costs of surveillance programs, including both direct spending and broader economic impacts, far exceeded their demonstrated benefits, while supporters contended that preventing even a single terrorist attack justified the entire investment in surveillance capabilities. The prisoner exchange and diplomatic negotiation processes that occasionally resulted from surveillance operations created additional costs and complexities. When surveillance operations led to the arrest of foreign intelligence operatives or the exposure of diplomatic sources, the resulting negotiations often required significant diplomatic resources and sometimes resulted in the release of individuals who had been imprisoned for espionage-related activities. The economic infrastructure supporting NSA surveillance operations represented a fundamental transformation of the American intelligence community from a primarily government-operated system to a complex public-private partnership that involved billions of dollars in spending, extensive contractor relationships, and deep integration with the broader American economy. This transformation had profound implications for both the effectiveness of intelligence operations and the broader questions of democratic oversight and accountability. that would become central to debates about surveillance reform. The systematic unraveling of America's secret surveillance apparatus began not with a dramatic confrontation or policy reversal, but with the quiet, methodical work of a 29-year-old systems administrator who had concluded that the American people deserved to know what their government was doing in their name. Edward Snowden's decision to expose NSA surveillance programs represented the convergence of personal conscience, institutional dysfunction, and technological capability that would transform global discussions about privacy, security, and democratic governance. Snowden's path to whistleblowing began during his employment with the Central Intelligence Agency from 2006 to 2009, where he witnessed what he later described as systematic violations of constitutional principles. As a systems administrator with broad access to CIA networks, Snowden observed intelligence operations that he believed exceeded legal authorities and democratic oversight. His concerns deepened during subsequent employment with NSA contractors, where he gained access to some of the agency's most sensitive surveillance programs. The technical nature of Snowden's work provided him with comprehensive understanding of NSA surveillance capabilities that few individuals possessed. As a systems administrator for Booz Allen Hamilton, supporting NSA operations in Hawaii, Snowden had access to internal NSA networks, training materials, operational procedures, and classified documents describing surveillance programs. This access allowed him to document not just the existence of surveillance programs, but their technical capabilities, legal justifications, and operational impacts. Snowden's decision to expose surveillance programs was influenced by several factors that converged during his final months as an NSA contractor. The Obama administration's aggressive prosecution of previous whistleblowers, including Chelsea Manning and others, convinced Snowden that traditional channels for reporting government wrongdoing were ineffective and potentially dangerous. Internal NSA procedures for reporting concerns about surveillance programs were limited and generally resulted in minor policy adjustments rather than fundamental reforms. The specific catalyst for Snowden's decision appears to have been his access to documents describing the scope and legal justifications for NSA surveillance programs. Internal NSA training materials revealed that the agency was collecting communications from American citizens on a massive scale while maintaining legal justifications that Snowden believed were fundamentally flawed. The discrepancy between public statements by government officials about surveillance programs and the reality documented in classified files convinced Snowden that public disclosure was necessary. The technical preparation for Snowden's disclosure required sophisticated understanding of NSA security systems and careful planning to avoid detection. Snowden used his administrative access to copy approximately 40,000 classified documents onto encrypted storage devices, a process that required several months and careful attention to NSA security monitoring systems. The documents he selected provided comprehensive documentation of surveillance programs while avoiding operational details that might compromise ongoing intelligence operations or endanger intelligence sources. Snowden's initial contact with journalists began in December 2012 when he reached out anonymously to documentarian Laura Poitras, who had previously reported on government surveillance programs and was known to use sophisticated encryption and security measures. The initial exchanges between Snowden and Poitras, conducted through encrypted communications, established the security protocols that would govern their collaboration and eventually led to the involvement of additional journalists, including Glenn Greenwald and Barton Gellman. The operational security measures employed by Snowden and the journalists represented a sophisticated understanding of government surveillance capabilities and the technical measures necessary to avoid detection. Communications were conducted through encrypted channels. Meetings were arranged using complex protocols designed to avoid surveillance, and document sharing was accomplished through encrypted file transfers that were difficult for intelligence agencies to monitor or attribute. The first public revelation of NSA surveillance programs came on June 5, 2013, when The Guardian published a story by Glenn Greenwald revealing the existence of a secret court order requiring Verizon to provide the NSA with metadata for all phone calls made by its customers. This story, based on a classified foreign intelligence surveillance court order provided by Snowden, demonstrated that the NSA was collecting information about the phone calls of millions of Americans who were not suspected of any wrongdoing. The public reaction to the initial surveillance revelations was immediate and intense, with politicians, civil liberties advocates, and technology experts expressing shock at the scope of NSA data collection. The revelation that the government was collecting metadata for all phone calls contradicted previous public statements by intelligence officials and raised fundamental questions about the balance between security and privacy in the digital age. The international diplomatic fallout from surveillance revelations was extensive and long-lasting, creating tensions with allied governments whose citizens had been subjected to NSA surveillance and whose leaders had been targeted for intelligence collection. The revelation that the NSA had monitored the communications of German Chancellor Angela Merkel and other allied leaders created diplomatic crises that required extensive damage control efforts and complicated American relationships with key allies. European governments and institutions responded to surveillance revelations with investigations, legal challenges, and policy changes designed to protect their citizens from American surveillance. The European Parliament conducted extensive hearings on NSA surveillance, while European courts issued rulings limiting data sharing with American companies and government agencies. These responses created ongoing tensions in transatlantic relationships and complicated American intelligence operations in Europe. The technology industry's response to surveillance revelations was complex and varied, with different companies adopting different strategies for addressing user concerns about privacy and government surveillance. Some companies, including Apple and Google, implemented technical measures designed to limit government access to user data, while others focused on transparency measures that provided users with more information about government data requests. The broader public debate, sparked by surveillance revelations, encompassed fundamental questions about democratic governance, constitutional rights, and the appropriate balance between security and privacy in the digital age. Civil liberties organizations filed numerous lawsuits challenging the legality of surveillance programs, while privacy advocates called for comprehensive surveillance reform and stronger oversight of intelligence agencies. Congressional response to surveillance revelations was divided along partisan lines, with Republicans generally defending surveillance programs as necessary for national security, while Democrats expressed more mixed reactions that reflected concerns about privacy rights and government overreach. Several congressional committees conducted investigations into surveillance programs, though these efforts were limited by classification restrictions that prevented full public disclosure of findings. The institutional damage to the NSA and broader intelligence community from surveillance revelations was significant and enduring, undermining public trust in intelligence agencies and complicating recruitment and retention of qualified personnel. The agency's reputation for technical competence was damaged by revelations about security breaches and unauthorized disclosures, while its relationships with technology companies and international partners were strained by revelations about surveillance cooperation and targeting. Reform efforts began almost immediately after surveillance revelations, with both executive branch officials and congressional leaders proposing changes to surveillance authorities, oversight procedures, and transparency measures. However, these reform efforts were constrained by competing demands for continued intelligence capabilities and concerns about national security risks, leading to incremental changes rather than fundamental restructuring of surveillance programs. The long-term implications of surveillance revelations extended far beyond immediate policy changes to encompass broader questions about privacy, technology, and democratic governance in the digital age. The technical capabilities revealed by Snowden demonstrated that comprehensive surveillance of digital communications was not only possible, but already operational, forcing societies around the world to grapple with the implications of living in an age of potential total information awareness. The institutional and cultural reckoning that followed the Snowden revelations unfolded gradually across multiple domains of American society, creating lasting changes in government policy, corporate behavior, international relations, and public consciousness that continue to shape debates about surveillance and privacy nearly a decade later. The process of grappling with the implications of mass surveillance revealed both the resilience and the limitations of democratic institutions when confronted with fundamental questions about the proper scope of government power. The immediate governmental response to surveillance revelations involved a complex balancing act between defending the legality and necessity of intelligence programs while acknowledging public concerns about privacy and oversight. President Obama, who had campaigned on promises of greater government transparency and constitutional adherence, found himself in the difficult position of defending surveillance programs that his administration had expanded and maintained despite his previous criticisms of Bush administration policies. The President's Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technologies, established in August 2013, represented the most comprehensive official examination of American surveillance programs since their creation. The five-member panel, comprising former intelligence officials, legal scholars, and technology experts, conducted extensive classified briefings and interviews before issuing 46 recommendations for surveillance reform in December 2013. The review group's report, while acknowledging the value of intelligence programs for national security, concluded that existing surveillance authorities had been interpreted too broadly and that additional oversight and transparency measures were necessary to protect constitutional rights and maintain public trust. The report recommended ending the bulk collection of telephone metadata, requiring higher standards for surveillance of foreign leaders, and implementing stronger privacy protections for non-US persons whose communications were collected incidentally. Congressional response to surveillance revelations was shaped by competing pressures from constituents concerned about privacy rights and intelligence officials warning about national security risks. The House of Representatives conducted extensive hearings on surveillance programs, with Intelligence Committee members receiving classified briefings on operational details, while other members were limited to publicly available information about program authorities and oversight procedures. The USA Freedom Act, enacted in June 2015, represented the most significant surveillance reform legislation since the original FISA law in 1978. The legislation ended the NSA's bulk collection of telephone metadata, requiring the agency to obtain specific court orders to search telecommunications company records for information about particular individuals or groups. The law also implemented new transparency requirements for surveillance programs and established a public interest advocate to argue privacy concerns before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. However, surveillance reform efforts were constrained by classification restrictions that prevented full public debate about the scope and effectiveness of intelligence programs. Many members of Congress acknowledged that they could not adequately evaluate surveillance programs without access to classified information about their operational details and intelligence value, creating a democratic accountability problem that persisted despite reform efforts. Apple's high-profile confrontation with the FBI over unlocking the iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino attackers in 2016 illustrated the ongoing tensions between law enforcement access and privacy protection. The company's refusal to create software that would compromise iPhone security measures reflected broader industry concerns about government surveillance capabilities and the importance of maintaining user trust in digital products and services. The international response to surveillance revelations included significant changes in data protection laws, intelligence sharing agreements, and diplomatic relationships that created lasting constraints on American surveillance operations. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, implemented in 2018, established strict requirements for the collection and processing of personal data that complicated American companies' ability to share user information with government agencies. Intelligence sharing relationships with allied governments were strained by revelations about NSA surveillance of foreign leaders and citizens, leading to renegotiated agreements that included additional privacy protections and oversight procedures. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance adapted to include stronger safeguards for the communications of partner nation citizens, while maintaining cooperative relationships for foreign intelligence collection. The archival and historical documentation of surveillance programs has been complicated by ongoing classification restrictions that limit scholarly and journalistic access to government records. The National Security Archive and other research organizations have filed numerous Freedom of Information Act requests for surveillance program documents, but most requests have been denied or heavily redacted due to national security concerns. The NSA has declassified selected documents about surveillance programs, including some historical materials about program development and legal authorities, but comprehensive documentation of surveillance operations remains classified. This limited historical record makes it difficult for scholars and policymakers to fully assess the costs and benefits of surveillance programs or to learn lessons that might inform future policy decisions. Civil liberties organizations have established ongoing monitoring and advocacy programs focused on surveillance issues, maintaining public attention on government surveillance activities, and continuing to challenge the legality of surveillance programs through litigation and political advocacy. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, American Civil Liberties Union, and other organizations have developed specialized expertise in surveillance law and technology, providing ongoing oversight of government activities in this area. Academic institutions have developed new research programs and educational initiatives focused on surveillance, privacy, and digital rights, creating intellectual infrastructure for ongoing analysis of these issues. Law schools have established clinics focused on surveillance law, while computer science and public policy programs have developed courses examining the technical and social implications of digital surveillance technologies. The memorial and commemorative aspects of surveillance revelations have been complex and contested, with different groups offering different interpretations of Snowden's actions and their significance for American democracy. Civil liberties advocates have celebrated Snowden as a whistleblower who exposed illegal government activities, while intelligence officials and some policymakers have characterized him as a traitor who damaged national security and aided foreign adversaries. Museum and educational institutions have struggled with how to present surveillance revelations and their aftermath, given ongoing political controversies and classification restrictions on relevant government documents. The museum in Washington, D.C. included exhibits on surveillance and press freedom before its closure in 2019, while other institutions have incorporated surveillance issues into broader exhibits on civil liberties and constitutional rights. The personal reckonings of individuals involved in surveillance programs have been documented through memoirs, interviews, and biographical accounts that provide insights into the human dimensions of these institutional activities. Former NSA officials, including Michael Hayden and Keith Alexander, have written memoirs defending surveillance programs and criticizing Snowden's disclosure methods, while other former officials have expressed more mixed views about surveillance authorities and oversight procedures. Snowden himself has contributed to public understanding of surveillance issues through his memoir, published in 2019, and ongoing participation in public debates through video conferences and interviews. His continuing residence in Russia has complicated his ability to participate fully in American debates about surveillance reform, but his writings and statements have continued to influence public discussions about privacy and government accountability. The ongoing legal and political processes related to surveillance programs continue to evolve, with periodic reviews of surveillance authorities, court challenges to specific programs, and legislative proposals for additional reforms. The debate over reauthorization of surveillance authorities has become a regular feature of congressional deliberations, with each review providing opportunities for additional oversight and reform measures. The cultural impact of surveillance revelations has been reflected in popular entertainment, academic research, and public discourse that has incorporated awareness of government surveillance capabilities into broader discussions about privacy, technology, and democratic governance. Films, television programs, and literary works have explored themes related to surveillance and privacy rights, while academic conferences and public forums have examined the implications of living in an age of comprehensive digital monitoring. The technological developments that have followed surveillance revelations include both improvements in privacy-protecting technologies and advances in surveillance capabilities that continue to reshape the balance between security and privacy. The development of new encryption technologies, privacy-focused communication applications, and anonymity tools has provided individuals with better capabilities for protecting their communications from surveillance, while advances in artificial intelligence and data analysis have enhanced government capabilities for processing and analyzing collected information. The long-term implications of surveillance revelations for American democracy and international relations continue to unfold, with ongoing debates about the appropriate balance between security and privacy rights, the effectiveness of democratic oversight of intelligence activities, and the role of technology companies in protecting user privacy while cooperating with legitimate government requests for information. The story of NSA mass surveillance and the Snowden revelations represents more than an intelligence scandal or a debate about privacy rights. It reflects fundamental tensions between democratic governance and national security imperatives that have existed throughout American history, but reached unprecedented complexity in the digital age. The comprehensive surveillance apparatus documented in the Snowden files was not the product of a single policy decision or the work of rogue officials, but rather the cumulative result of institutional momentum, technological capability, and political choices made across multiple administrations and congressional sessions. The human cost of this surveillance system extended far beyond the immediate participants to encompass millions of citizens whose communications were collected without their knowledge or consent, technology workers who struggled with the implications of their company's cooperation with surveillance programs, and intelligence professionals who grappled with the ethical dimensions of their work. The institutional costs included damaged relationships with allied governments, reduced public trust in democratic institutions, and ongoing debates about the proper scope of government power that continue to influence American politics and policy. The technological legacy of surveillance revelations includes both enhanced privacy protections and continued surveillance capabilities that reflect the ongoing struggle between individual privacy and collective security in democratic societies. The technical capabilities revealed by Snowden demonstrated that comprehensive digital surveillance was not merely possible but already operational, forcing societies worldwide to confront questions about privacy and autonomy that previous generations could not have imagined. Perhaps most significantly, the surveillance revelations illuminated the importance of informed democratic debate about government policies that affect fundamental rights and freedoms. The classification system that kept surveillance programs secret from public scrutiny also prevented meaningful democratic oversight and accountability, creating a gap between the theoretical protections of constitutional democracy and the practical realities of government power in the national security sphere. The ongoing implications of these revelations for American democracy include questions about the adequacy of existing oversight mechanisms, the balance between transparency and security in democratic governance, and the role of whistleblowing in exposing government activities that may exceed legal or constitutional boundaries. These questions remain unresolved and continue to influence debates about surveillance authorities, government accountability, and the protection of civil liberties in an age of persistent security threats and rapidly evolving technology. The lessons of NSA surveillance and the Snowden revelations extend beyond specific policy questions to encompass broader principles about the relationship between citizens and their government, the importance of constitutional constraints on government power, and the ongoing responsibility of democratic societies to balance competing values and interests through informed public debate and accountable political processes that reflect the complexity and gravity of these enduring challenges.